$100,000. In 1995, this amount represented genuine financial freedom. You could buy a complete house in most American cities, fund 4 years at a prestigious university, or build the foundation for lifelong prosperity. Today, that same $100,000 barely covers a down payment on a modest home, won't pay for 2 years at many colleges, and feels more like pocket change than transformational wealth. What happened over these 30 years reveals one of the most important economic lessons of our time. The purchasing power didn't just disappear into thin air. It got systematically transferred through monetary policies that most people don't understand, but everyone feels the effects of. Here's the straightforward reality. When governments create money faster than the economy grows, that new money doesn't benefit everyone equally. The people who receive it first get to spend it at yesterday's prices. Everyone else watches their savings lose value as prices rise to meet the expanded money supply. This process has a name: monetary debasement. The Romans did it by mixing copper with their silver coins. We do it with computer keystrokes at the Federal Reserve. Let me show you exactly how this played out in your lifetime, what it means for your financial future, and how you can protect yourself from what's coming next. In 1995, America operated under fundamentally different economic conditions. The median home price sat at $113,000, which meant your $100,000 could buy you an entire house in cities like Indianapolis, Cleveland, or Kansas City. But let's put this in perspective that shows how dramatically things have changed. A public school teacher earning $35,000 per year could realistically save $100,000 over 3 to 4 years of disciplined saving. Once they had that money, they could purchase their home outright and never make another mortgage payment. Imagine the psychological freedom of owning your shelter completely by age 30 with no monthly housing costs for the rest of your life. College education followed similar mathematics. Public universities charged about $6,800 per year for tuition, room, and board. Private universities averaged around $17,000 annually. Your $100,000 could fund a complete 4-year education at Harvard, Stanford, or MIT, with tens of thousands left over for books, living expenses, and even a reliable used car. The key difference was that essential costs grew slowly while wages grew faster. Home prices increased roughly 3% per year. College costs rose with general inflation, and a college degree virtually guaranteed access to well-paying jobs with benefits and pension plans. The system rewarded people who worked hard and saved money. This created what economists call real wealth accumulation. When you saved money, it maintained or increased its purchasing power over time. A dollar saved in 1990 could still buy roughly a dollar's worth of goods in 2000. The financial system encouraged saving because saved money actually preserved value. Most Americans kept their money in savings accounts, certificates of deposit, or government bonds. These safe investments paid 5 to 8% interest, which often exceeded inflation rates. You could literally get ahead financially by putting money in the bank and leaving it alone. The concept of needing to invest in volatile assets just to maintain purchasing power would have seemed absurd to most families. By 2024, those same financial calculations had been completely rewritten. The median home price reached $420,000, meaning your $100,000 now covers roughly 25% of an average house. College tuition at public universities climbed to $28,000 per year, while private universities charge over $60,000 annually. That money that once bought 4 years at Harvard now covers less than 2 years at most private colleges. These changes didn't happen randomly. They resulted from specific policy decisions made at the highest levels of government and central banking. Understanding this timeline helps explain not just what happened, but why it's likely to continue. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet tells the whole story in simple numbers. In 1995, the Fed held about $500 billion in assets. Today, that number has grown to over $7.4 trillion, right, representing a 1,480% increase. During the same period, median wages increased only about 180%. This massive gap between money creation and economic growth explains exactly where your purchasing power went. When central banks create money faster than the economy produces goods and services, that extra money has to go somewhere. It flows into assets like real estate, stocks, and commodities, driving their prices far above what wages alone could support. The result is an economy where asset owners get steadily richer while people depending on wages get steadily poorer in relative terms. This process follows a predictable pattern that economists call the Cantillon effect, named after an 18th century French economist who first described how new money benefits early recipients at the expense of later recipients. Here's how it works in practice today. When the Federal Reserve creates new money, it doesn't just appear randomly in everyone's bank accounts. Instead, it follows a specific path through the economy. First, banks and financial institutions receive access to this new money through various lending programs and asset purchases. These institutions then use the fresh money to buy investments like stocks, bonds, and real estate before prices have had time to adjust upward. Next, this money flows to corporations and wealthy individuals who have close relationships with major banks. They can borrow large amounts at extremely low interest rates and use this cheap money to purchase more assets. Only later does this money reach ordinary workers through wages, and by then the prices of essential goods like housing and education have already been driven up by the earlier recipients. This timing advantage creates systematic wealth transfer. The people who get access to new money first can buy assets at yesterday's prices. Everyone else has to buy those same assets at tomorrow's inflated prices. It's like being told about a sale after all the good deals are gone, except this happens continuously with the most important purchases of your lifetime. Consider what this meant for housing. In the early 2000s, artificially low interest rates allowed real estate investors and financial institutions to borrow massive amounts cheaply and buy properties across the country. This drove up housing prices long before most working families realized what was happening. By the time ordinary buyers entered the market, they found themselves competing against cash offers and investor purchases that were only possible because of earlier access to cheap money. The same pattern played out in education. As government-backed student loans became easier to obtain, universities could raise tuition knowing students could borrow whatever amounts they charged. The schools got paid immediately, the loan servicers earned decades of interest payments, and students graduated with debt that often exceeded their parents' home mortgages. This exact process destroyed the Roman Empire, and studying that collapse provides crucial insights for understanding our current situation. Between 190 and 270 AD, Roman emperors systematically reduced the silver content in their coins from 90% down to just 5%. They did this to fund endless military campaigns, massive public works projects, and an increasingly expensive bureaucracy. Roman citizens weren't stupid. They quickly figured out that newer coins contained less precious metal than older ones. So they followed a logical strategy: spend the new, debased coins immediately and hoard the older, more valuable ones. This behavior, now known as Gresham's Law, states that bad money drives out good money from circulation. Sound familiar? Today, Americans rush to buy real estate, stocks, and even cryptocurrencies to escape the debasement of the dollar. They spend their rapidly depreciating cash as quickly as possible and hold on to assets that maintain value. The behavior is identical to Roman citizens 1,800 years ago, just with different tools. Rome's monetary collapse didn't happen overnight. It took about 200 years from the beginning of serious debasement to the final collapse of the Western Roman Empire. We've been running our current monetary experiment for about 50 years, since President Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold in 1971. If Rome's timeline is any guide, we're roughly where Rome was around 250 AD, still functioning, but showing clear signs of monetary stress. The symptoms match perfectly. In late-stage Rome, Young people couldn't afford to buy homes in major cities. Sound familiar? Roman citizens faced crushing tax burdens to fund military adventures and social programs. Check. The wealth gap between elites and ordinary citizens grew to extreme levels as those closest to the money creation process got rich while everyone else struggled. We're seeing this today. Most importantly, Rome never voluntarily returned to sound money. The emperors kept debasing the currency until it became worthless, and the empire collapsed under the weight of economic chaos. History shows that once governments discover they can fund their activities by creating money, they rarely stop voluntarily. Market forces eventually impose discipline, but usually through crisis and collapse. Understanding how we got here requires looking at three distinct phases of monetary policy over the past 25 years. Each phase accelerated the destruction of purchasing power while enriching asset holders at the expense of savers and wage earners. Phase 1, the housing bubble, 2000-2007. After the dot-com crash, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan dropped interest rates from 6.5% to just 1%. This made borrowing incredibly cheap, flooding the real estate market with easy money. Home prices doubled in many cities while wages grew only about 20%. Financial institutions packaged mortgages into complex securities and sold them worldwide, creating a global bubble in real estate prices. The media celebrated rising home values as wealth creation, but it was actually wealth transfer. Existing homeowners saw paper gains while first-time buyers found themselves priced out or forced to take on dangerous loans. The bubble burst in 2007, destroying millions of families' finances, but the government's response set up an even bigger bubble in the next phase. Phase 2, quantitative easing, 2008-2019. Instead of allowing the financial system to reset with lower asset prices, policymakers decided to prop up the system with unprecedented money creation. The Federal Reserve purchased $3.7 trillion worth of bonds and mortgages, directly injecting money into financial markets. This policy, called quantitative easing, was sold as economic stimulus, but primarily benefited people who already owned assets. Stock markets reached record highs, while median wages stagnated. The wealth gap exploded as asset owners got richer, while wage earners fell further behind. Young people found themselves locked out of home ownership and stock ownership by high prices, while older generations who already owned these assets saw massive increases in their net worth. Phase 3, COVID money printing, 2020 present. The response to COVID-19 lockdowns involved creating more money in a single year than had existed just decades earlier. The Federal Reserve created approximately $4.2 trillion in 2020 alone. While small businesses were forced to close and millions lost their jobs, financial markets soared to new heights. Housing prices increased 40% in just 3 years, completing the largest wealth transfer in American history. Each phase followed identical logic: create money, inject it into asset markets, and claim the resulting price increases represent economic growth. The pattern is so consistent that you can predict what comes next: more money creation, higher asset prices, and continued destruction of purchasing power for anyone holding cash or depending on wages alone. Understanding how the system works suggests clear strategies for protecting and building wealth. Since monetary debasement systematically transfers wealth from currency holders to asset holders, the logical response involves becoming an asset holder yourself, real estate investment. Despite high prices, real estate remains one of the few appreciating assets that ordinary people can purchase with leverage. When you buy a $400,000 house with $80,000 down, you control $400,000 worth of appreciating assets while your mortgage gets paid with depreciating dollars. As inflation continues, your fixed mortgage payments become easier while your property value tends to rise. The key is understanding that real estate serves as both shelter and inflation hedge. Even if prices seem high today, they're likely to be higher tomorrow, given current monetary policies. The families who bought expensive houses in 2010 now look like financial geniuses, not because they were smarter, but because they understood the monetary system's direction. Stock market index funds history demonstrates that broad stock market indices outpace currency debasement over time. The S&P 500 has returned approximately 10% annually since 1957, while the dollar has lost about 90% of its purchasing power over the same period. This isn't coincidence, it's mathematics. When money supply grows faster than economic output, asset prices must rise to absorb the excess money. Index fund investing works because you're buying shares of companies that can raise prices along with inflation. When the cost of everything goes up, profitable companies can charge more for their products and services. Their stock prices tend to rise accordingly, protecting your purchasing power in a way that savings accounts cannot. Business ownership and valuable skills. Even small business ownership offers protection against monetary debasement. Business revenues typically increase with inflation, while many costs, especially loan payments, become easier to handle with depreciating currency. A restaurant that borrowed money in 2020 can now repay those loans with dollars that buy less than when they borrowed them. Similarly, developing valuable skills provides protection that no monetary policy can destroy. Plumbers, electricians, programmers, and healthcare workers become more valuable as currency loses purchasing power. These skills represent real productivity that maintains value regardless of what happens to paper money. The next phase of monetary control involves central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, which represent the ultimate evolution of government money management. Unlike physical cash, digital currencies can be programmed with specific features that give authorities unprecedented control over spending and saving. CBDCs can be designed to expire after certain time periods, preventing people from saving and forcing immediate spending. They can be geographically restricted, controlling where money can be used. They can be programmed for specific purchases, determining what people are allowed to buy. China's digital yuan already demonstrates many of these capabilities in real-world testing. The Federal Reserve has announced plans for CBDC implementation within this decade. This will complete the transformation from sound money backed by gold to programmable currency that can be controlled, monitored, and manipulated in real time. Every transaction will be visible to authorities, and spending can be controlled based on social credit scores, political opinions, or government priorities. Historical precedent suggests this will accelerate wealth transfer from individuals to institutions. When governments can program money to expire or restrict its use, traditional saving becomes impossible. Only real assets like land, businesses, and commodities provide protection from programmable currency controls. The collapse of 100,000's purchasing power over 30 years represents more than economic statistics. It demonstrates how monetary policy shapes individual lives and determines who prospers versus who struggles. The same forces that destroyed savings account value will continue operating until the system either reforms itself or collapses under its own contradictions. Your choice is straightforward. Adapt to the system as it actually works, or continue operating under assumptions that no longer apply. The middle class of 1995 could rely on wages and bank savings. The middle class of 2030 will need asset ownership and financial education to maintain purchasing power. The families who understand these principles and act accordingly will preserve and build wealth. Those who continue believing that hard work and saving money alone lead to prosperity will watch their purchasing power continue eroding regardless of their income or effort. This represents one of the most important financial decisions of your lifetime. Real wealth means owning assets that maintain value when currencies fail, developing skills that remain useful when systems change, and understanding patterns that help you adapt when rules get rewritten. The game has clear rules, even if they're not the rules taught in school or discussed in mainstream media. The purchasing power destruction of the past 30 years is not ending, it's accelerating. The same policies that turn house buying money into down payment money will turn today's retirement savings into tomorrow's monthly expenses. But understanding the system gives you time to position yourself accordingly. Knowledge remains the only currency that central banks cannot debase, and the only foundation for real wealth when paper money loses meaning. The rules are visible for those willing to see them. Play the game accordingly. If this analysis helped clarify how money really works, subscribe for more insights that mainstream financial education won't teach. The patterns repeat throughout history, but understanding them gives you the advantage you need.